So I wanted to make a little video of how you could make a 6 ignition fuse and then a battery fuse that will power your fuel pump as well as give power to your battery even when the key is off. So very similar to the LT1 swap fuse block, but instead of, I mean his fuse block is really cheap. The relays and the fuse block all together, you're going to be spending, maybe 20, 30 bucks. Not a big deal. But this is free, and instead of only having 3 ignition fuse, I don't know how many amps he runs on each one, probably 20. And you could put in bigger fuses if you wanted to, 15, 20, 25, 30. This is just an example. I decided not to go with this layout. The vehicle that my LS engine is going into, I figured out how to get into the fuse block, and I just added fuses directly in there. So I will only have 1 fuse block under the hood. A little bit more work, but in my opinion, worth it to only have 1 fuse block. So I'll start out mechanically how I would go about repurposing this, and then I'll talk about the electrical side second. So first of all, there's 2 small terminals on the back of your fuse block, your factory fuse block, which if you have this whole thing underneath your hood to power your LS engine and it's not doing anything else for the vehicle, you could free up a lot of space. So there's 2 options. You could do the smalls, which I'm only going to be using 1 of, but there's 2. So this one's nice for having a dummy one that you can go and put into your vehicle and figure out where you're going to mount it, because it's similar dimensions. The tabs are different, that's all. And then you've got these that are larger that you could use. So let's say that you wanted to run electric fans and you wanted your relays on your fuse block. I would use this, and then I would take this and go and figure out where I'm going to mount it. So if you're running electric fans, you need more relay space. I'm not going to do a whole pin out of everything that you're going to need to do for that, but essentially, let me make a little spot here to show you how I would figure out exactly what I would do. But what I did when I made this one is I just put it down. A little roll of tape will help give clearance for that tab there. And then what I did is it's like, I need a 40 amp fuse to power my whole all of my ignitions. So yeah, there's a good spot for it. Great. And then I was like, okay, I want to run a 20 amp fuse for my fuel pump. So where am I going to put this? Looks like I can't put it over there, so maybe over here. Great. So that'll run my fuel pump. And then let's say that I wanted to run electric fans. You only need 4-prong relays for anything on here, really. You don't really need the 5-prong. The 5th prong just confuses people, but if I wanted to run electric fans, could do that. And then I could be like, okay, I need a fuse spot for 12 volts all the time, and then I need a bunch of ignition 12 volts. And you go and you can move things around. Probably with this layout, I'd probably do a whole bar of ignition 12 volt right here, and then different outputs over here across fuses. That would give me, I think, 6 fuses right there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 fuses right there. And then just do a 12 volt ignition fuse, 12 volt battery fuse here to power your fuel pump. And probably what you could do is, because you want it fused to this relay, and then you'd probably want a fuse for this fan and a fuse for this fan. So I'd probably use 3 fuse spots. And there you go. Just like that, you've got a layout, and you know what pins need to go where. The nice thing about these relays is the big ones, the 40 amp relays and the 20 amp relays, they're the same pin locations. And it might sound intimidating to you on how to organize a pinout for this, but the important thing is finding 85. That's all that really matters. Once you find 85, that's ground. So, you know, if I flip it over and I keep track of 85, 85 is up here. So that's all that matters. On every single one of these fuses, 85 is up on the, so I ground every single one. So I'd put a ground here, and here, here, and here. And then opposite the ground is going to be your trigger switch. So request for fan 1, request for fan 2, request for fuel pump. And then these cross ones, it doesn't matter. 30 and 87, you can get them backwards forever. It only ever matters if you're doing a 5-pin and you're using 87A, because 30 will switch between 87 and 87A. But on a 4-pin, it's just 30 either goes nowhere or it goes to 87, and likewise 87 either goes to 30 or it goes nowhere. So 5 pins, it matters, but I'm not going to get too much into relays because it's not applicable for this. And really, you shouldn't be too intimidated by relays. And like I said, you can play with this and move it around and figure out where you actually want it. You know, if you want to have more room to grab these fuses, move it around. So that's how you can figure out your layout, and then you can make an Excel spreadsheet. These ones are 12 wide by 6, and you just label columns and rows. And then upright, you know, you can find out where everything is in your, and type it into your spreadsheet as you're looking at it this way. Then 1 through 6, highlight 1 through 6 as well as all of this grid, and then sort on your 1 through 6, have your Excel spreadsheet sort high to low here. And just like that, you'll have all of the pinouts that you made, but in the configuration that you're going to look at it when you're working on it. So that would be really handy if you're intimidated by this. And that's how you can make a fuse block layout. But let's say that you're not going to put any electric fans on and all you need is this. Then let me show you. First, let me finish talking about mechanically attaching it. So like I said, you're going to have 2. So one of them is going to be the dummy. So in this case, this one's the dummy one. Take a hammer and chisel, and this goes in like that. Flip it over, punch that out. It's just got a little retaining clip on the bolt. Then this little spacer here I would keep, because you could sorry, had to adjust something there. You could use that to keep it elevated from, you know, if I wanted to mount it onto a bracket or something, that would give room for my wires. And then, you know, you can use this bolt, but it barely comes to the surface here. So I would get a longer bolt, and then just find where you want to bolt this down. And what I would recommend is make it upright so that gravity is going this way. So this is down low and this is up high. Don't do it where this is don't do it where gravity is going, you know, this way. Like don't mount it sideways where water will, you know, if you make a cover for it that goes on and off this way, water gets in there, it'll hang out and it'll cause corrosion and ruin your junctions. It doesn't need to be waterproof. It's under the hood. It shouldn't be getting too wet, but you don't want water to pool there and hang out. So figure out where you're going to put it, and then what you can do is, if you drill out these 5, you don't have to drill them all the way out, just the tip of it is a rivet. Then this will all separate. This is only about an inch deep, and it's going to have holes in it. So you're going to have to get some epoxy and modify whichever one you end up using. If you end up using one of the big ones, you know, this one goes to the black one and this one goes to the gray one. So They have alignment tabs. You know, cut out what you don't need, and then you're going to need to extend down the sides a little ways so that you actually get down to here. And then you're going to have to do something about this relay hanging out over the edge if you use this smaller one, which might be a justification even if you're doing my smaller setup to use the bigger box just so that the relays are all contained inside of it. Move that a little bit. So then when it comes to mechanically mounting it, I would find a spot that you don't have any fuses or relay pins and put studs coming out so that the cap can go on and have like a slot in the cap, and then you can put like a knob left and right and it'll hold down the cap. You know, you could cut it, you could drill it so that it just like pops over, and then you could screw something on and have something to hold down the lid. That's another thing on the LT1 swap harness. Great information in there. I don't know why he doesn't use a fuse block that has a cover. I mean, it's not necessary, but I much prefer it personally. So you do all that and you've got your ability to mount your fuse block. Let me show you what I did for the wiring on this setup. So what I have in this configuration is I have, let me see here. This goes over this way. So in this configuration, I have inputs, inputs from the harness on my left hand, and on this side, I've got all the outputs that go and do stuff. So the biggest input is obviously going to be just 12 volts raw from the battery. A 12 gauge wire should do plenty. You probably won't need more than 40 amps to run your entire harness, including the factory style fuel pump. Bigger fuel pumps require more amperage, and then you'll need multiple relays, but that's more advanced stuff, and I don't do that. I just do stock stuff. So I'm cheap. I don't buy fancy things. So the 12 volts coming in, this is, you know, you could splice it and just have one wire. You can splice it a lot of different places, but you need 12 volts going to power this relay, and you need 12 volts going to power this fuse. That's the only 12 volt input. Across this fuse will come out, and this will go and provide 12 volts to the ECM at all times, and it's fused. At the same time, you're going to want to splice back to power this relay, which is going to be the fuel pump. And the fuel pump relay is going to send fused 12 volts. So the fuse that powers your fuel pump also powers the computer. So if your fuel pump shorts and goes out, you're going to lose all of your diagnostic codes. I don't think anybody really cares about that. If you do care about that, though, then you might want to have a separate fuse for your fuel pump. No, I haven't met anybody that is like, oh, I've got to have a separate fuse. It's totally fine to just use one fuse for those two things. That's, I think, how the factory does it too. And that's the same setup LT1 swap does. I'm really just copying his work, but you know, doing it with free components and more fuses. Anyways, so starting with the fuel pump relay, you now have fuse 12 volts going to here. Like I said, all you need to really keep track of is your grounds. So you've got these two ground wires that we already put in. Put a ground wire here. Opposite that is the trigger, you know, kitty corner. So you put your fuel request on here, and you send 12 volts there. And check with your harness, make sure, I'm pretty sure it sends 12 volts to request. If it's a variable ground, then supply a constant 12 volts, a red 12 volt to here also. But I'm pretty sure it's a trigger of 12 volts, and it goes to ground, and then these connect, and you'll send out fused 12 volts conditional upon request for fuel out this. And that just is that relay. Moving to the other relay, this is our initial 12 volts that came in from the battery, one of the two spots. I already mentioned the ground, and then we have a pink trigger, something from the original harness in the vehicle that gives ignition 12 volts. I don't care what color it is, just connect it to this pin right here. So when you have ignition, the car is running or cranking, either of those conditions, just the only time it's off is accessory or off. And then ground is kitty corner to that, and that'll link those. And then boom, you've got 12 volts from the battery going to here. I used an orange wire, but it's not fused, so it's just relayed. And then what I would do is I'd probably use a thicker piece of copper. But I would hold this up away from the block just a little bit. And I put pins in here just so I'd have some, but I would get some that had a little bit more of a tail on them, strip them all the way off, get all that insulation out of there. These are double ones, but I would just use some nice beefy, singles. This is honestly a little skinny, but this one's a little bit better. There's lots of these on the harness. Even not just coming out of these blocks, there's plugs on the wiring harness that you can, if you have a donor vehicle, like the whole vehicle, you can go and grab wires off of it. And they have let me find one. I had an example here. Here we go. Like this one, I pulled some wires out of. You just pop the back off, and then same as before. You poke. I like to use a paper clip. Where's my paper clip at? Paper clip for the big ones. You can use a safety pin too, or they have special tools for it if you want to buy it. But you just go in right there and it pops it, and then you can pull it out. So lots of ways to get wires from the harness, and then strip them down and solder them gently. Don't finish solder them. Just solder them enough that they stay in place with copper wire, something a little bit thicker than that. And I would do it, like that far up, and just gently solder it in, and then solder your output from this relay over to here. Once you've got that gently soldered, I would have these out still. I wouldn't, these just pop out, and then you can pull wires out. Once you have that gently soldered in, I'd pull all those pins in that row and this pin out, and then I'd solder it on a bench where you don't have to worry about frying your insulation. You're not going to have any insulation on there for this stage. And then get it soldered really good, and you can solder down into the connection, but not, I wouldn't go past here. But if a little bit of solder got down to here, it wouldn't matter. And then take liquid electric tape and just brush it all over that when it's done and cooled down. Put 2, maybe 3 coats, and I would hang it so that the terminals are up, so that liquid electric tape doesn't run down into these terminals where you're making your connection. That'll give you a really good electrical connection across all of those terminals, and it'll insulate it. And then you can reinstall it, and it should just plug right in if you haven't changed the geometry. Then on the other side, you just throw in a bunch of wires that are going to be essentially pinks. I don't have pinks with me. If you want to be fancy, you can buy new terminals and do pinks on all of them. I would just grab whatever is a good gauge wire, and then you're doing this in the LS harness, so it's not going to be seen. And then you can connect it to the pinks on your harness on the circuits that you want fused pink. And that's it. So in the end, you end up with a ground, a trigger for the harness, 12-volt ignition on, and then fuel pump request is going to go into the LS harness. So across the harness, all that you really need across the harness are these two, and then obviously the start signal. Because these grounds, there's a lot of splices that you end up trimming out of your harness, out of your LS harness, that you could just run this into, or repurpose one of the grounds. There's grounds on the fusebox terminals, so just use one of those and be done with it. Like it's only two spots that need ground for these two relays. That's it. So that's what I would do if I wanted to do it ultra cheap. Because the ones that are available online, I know a lot of you guys watching this are probably like, well, why don't you just spend the $30? Like, it's not that much money. This sounds like a lot of work. You still have to do the work. If you buy one of those kits online, you still have to do the work. You still have to understand the wiring. If you're gonna buy a made harness, it's already got a fuse block in it. Good for you. I like working on things. I take pride in my work, and it's fun, and it's not bad to understand how your electrical system works in your vehicle. Because, you know, if I have a problem on the side of the road, I bet you with a knife and liquid electric tape, I could fix just about any electric problem with this harness. At least good enough to get me home. So I think it's good to understand how the electric system, it's intimidating at first, but as you get through it, it's much less intimidating. And then, like I said, if you want to buy one online, like a already made fuse block, the thing that I don't like about them is a lot of times they don't use the mini fuses. They have a ground bar that you're never going to use. It's just going to be there to create opportunity for shorts and problems, because those are for accessory things and for people that don't know how to wire, really. I don't like any of the fuse blocks that I've seen online. If anything, I would find a older vehicle that had a small fuse block and take a fuse block out of an older vehicle and rewire it. I like the mini plugs. I like it to be compact. If you want to buy one online, you certainly can. It's real easy to do that, and you can just run your junctions how you want. The nice thing about the ones you buy, they're maybe like they're a lot bigger, right? So they're maybe like that big, right? And even compared to these little ones, they're still a lot bigger than those, and they have maybe 6 fuses, and then they have like 6 relays. So you shouldn't probably need that many relays. So it's just a lot of space under the hood that you're never going to need. And I like it to be compact. So that's why I like this setup and why I would use it if I wasn't putting it into my my donor vehicle or my receiving vehicle's fuse box. So hopefully somebody likes this and finds it useful, but lots of different ways to run your fuse block, though. It's not a big deal. Don't worry about it. Don't be too intimidated by the fuse block. And don't, if you're trying to do it ultra low buck, don't feel like you have to buy anything. Liquid electric tape is the main thing you need, and maybe some soldering. And then good crimpers. Especially if you're not going to solder your joints, which GM doesn't solder their joints. GM crimps. Even the splices in the LS harness. There's all kinds of splices. Like here's a splice right there. You think that they soldered in there? No, they crimped it. Crimps are great. What's not great is real basic crimping tools. Like if you try and crimp with these right here, you're going to be like, oh yeah, my crimps suck. They always fall apart. This is not even a nice crimping tool. This is I would say a pretty budget friendly crimping tool, but at least it it does a decent job with basic crimps. And then for terminal crimping, I've got something that'll actually crimp. So get good crimping tools, or learn how to solder, and find your pinouts for your harness and go through it. It's actually not that bad, and I feel a lot better about my vehicle and my ability to fix it if I have a problem. So